All right, welcome back to the Outlet Podcast with Gabe and Eric. I'm Gabe, and that's Eric.
I'm Eric.
What's up, man? How's it going?
Going pretty good.
So we had recorded a podcast previously, and the audio had got messed up. So we're going to talk about China again today.
China.
So Eric, you've been to China many times.
Yeah, I've been to China 3 times now. The first time was when I was 8. I went for like 10 days. Wasn't super eventful, but
What were you there for?
Just a little vacation with my dad. Nothing in particular. I was 8. Didn't really do much.
Do you remember just?
I remember like little screenshots, right? Like we took a shortcut through the slums, right? And seeing all the shacks basically built by the people themselves, right? No building regulations, and eating weird food. We ate like snake eggs, right? Which was nuts, right? Because you'd expect them to be like regular eggs, but they're like little leathery squishy sacks, and you like pop them with a little knife and just squirt them into your mouth like an oyster.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and apparently it was a delicacy, but it was not that good, I'll be honest.
Not tasty?
No, not tasty at all. Yeah.
Cultures have just weird food.
Weird, but like, let's
So
be
it's
honest,
weird to us.
Chinese culture has weird foods. All right, they just eat anything out there,
Yeah.
like. Yeah, like you go into like a little street food market, right? And they're cooking up lamb, beef, and stuff, but right next to it is like squid and scorpion and like larva and stuff, and you're like, who eats this? Like I did once just for the novelty.
Really?
Also, not good. Scorpion doesn't taste good, bro. It just tastes like oil, Yeah.
So what were you doing in China when you went there for a long time?
When I went there for a long time, so the second time I went to China, I was 17, and I went for 4 months. The first 3 months I spent in Beijing, just learning Chinese at a little Chinese school for foreigners to come there and learn. And it was really fun. I lived with a Chinese family, and I felt like I really immersed myself into the life of a Chinese person that lives in Beijing, right? I commuted with everybody else, walked to the subway and sat in a crowded subway train for half an hour, went to my school, ate the food, ate so many noodles.
Oh yeah,
a lot of noodles. I had a little routine going, and it was a good time.
Well, that's awesome because you also speak the language. You're fluent.
That's right. I've also
so you can trek through China perfectly fine.
That's right. Yeah, and it's I've basically studied Chinese not my entire life, but my memorable life, right? Everything that I've remembered, I've always learned Chinese. I've always gone to Chinese school, right? My first memories are in, Chinese immersion preschool, where all the other students are Chinese, all the teachers are Chinese, all we're speaking is Chinese, all we're doing is Chinese stuff. So, from a very young age, I was immersed into Chinese culture. So for me to go to China, not only do I speak the language, but I also kind of understand the culture, understand what's going on. So there's no real culture shock for me,
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really awesome.
Yeah.
So when you were in Chinese school, did you have like really strict teachers? Were they always like super harsh?
Very, very harsh. I remember.
Okay, how does it compare to normal public education?
Normal public education, well, there's a lot more authority on the teacher's side as opposed to in a regular American school, right? Like, obviously, there are certain American public school teachers that are very strict and will, yell at kids and stuff, but they'll never smack the kids, right? Because that's illegal, right?
Yeah,
but I remember, I don't remember this, but my parents have told me that they pulled me out of like 2 Chinese preschools because the teachers were smacking the kids, and like I remember they told me that I came back one day from preschool saying I'm a bad boy, right? Because the teacher told me that I was a bad boy, right?
What?
Yeah,
No
and so
way.
they pulled me out of that one too.
That is
yeah,
crazy.
so I cycled through like probably 6-7 preschools before they put me into Wahaha. Yeah,
Were you in the Jing Institute at all?
That's right. Yeah, I was there for like
The Jing Institute is a local Chinese school.
local
around
Chinese
us.
school here in Scripps. I was there for like 6th grade until freshman year. Yeah, so all of middle school, go there every day after school, learn some Kung Fu, Chinese.
That's awesome, dude.
All that stuff. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so you also went to China for 6 months, right?
So 4 months that first time, and then 2 months this last
so
time.
6 months in total.
6 months in total. Yeah.
So which was a better experience?
Better experience.
So the 4 or the 2?
I mean, it's very different experiences, right? Like living in Beijing. Beijing is China's capital. It's this massive metropolis, super polluted, million cars, like over, I think it's like 3 million people, like it just in that area, right? And it's just so massive. And the thing with Chinese cities is they don't really have the same feel as American cities, if you, like density wise, right? So in American cities, there's a downtown, right, and that's where all the tallest buildings are. And as you approach that downtown, buildings will get taller and taller. The density will increase. It kind of has an organic feeling to it, right? But Chinese cities, it's not like that at all, right? You'll have just rice paddies, and then out of nowhere you get 1,600-story apartment buildings, right? And then it's just rice paddies again, right? Or the center of the city, like in Beijing, it's Tiananmen Square and the Forbidden City, which aren't really that tall at all. They're like 4, 5, 6 stories tall, and that is the entire center of the city, is this complex of government buildings and the Forbidden City and stuff. So even though it's the center of the city, it doesn't look like it and doesn't feel like it from an American perspective. Yeah. So living in Beijing is an experience all to itself, right?
I bet there's so much to talk about in Beijing.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much happening, right? Because it's the political center, right? You'll see
super fast-paced city, I guess.
Yeah, military convoys just coming down the street, and there's uniformed officers. Half the people there work for the CCP. Like, it's very it's intense. I'll say that to put it lightly. But this most recent time that I was in China, I was teaching English in a considerably, by Chinese standards, it was a small city. I think it had something like 500,000 people living there.
Small,
little village, right?
Yeah.
But
massive city in America.
Huge, right? It's like Cincinnati. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I went there to teach English, and it was in the southern part of China with very, very beautiful mountains all over the place, and it was very picturesque. Pretty much every picture you took was just automatically beautiful just because of the surroundings. Yeah, and this city was much more slower paced than Beijing, because it was mainly a tourist based city, right, where all the money came from tourism, and that means that people only worked like 3 months a year, came in, and the other 3/4 of the year they were kind of just sitting around and smoking cigarettes. Yeah,
waiting for the tourists
to come back. The tourists. Yeah,
that's crazy.
Yeah, so it was a very laid back kind of lifestyle. Everyone's just riding around mopeds, going and visiting their families, and it was a really nice place. And there was a good like community of foreigners there too, not just at this school teaching, but just living in the city as well, just because it's such a beautiful city. And so you go out to the bars, and half the people are white people and the other half are Chinese people. So it was a good mix of the West and China.
Really?
Yeah.
But I mean, they probably didn't speak Chinese, right?
I mean, like some
of the white people.
Yeah, like they were all pretty. Because the thing is, you can get by in China just speaking English. Like most of the service people that you interact with can speak enough English that you can kind of get by and order your McDonald's, right? And I don't want to talk down on the people of Yangshuo, the foreigners of Yangshuo. They're all just a little bit lazy.
Really?
They weren't there to learn or like do anything. They were kind of just there to kick back and go kayaking and mountain climbing.
They weren't like adapting and understanding the culture at all.
They were just, getting drunk every night and, shooting off fireworks.
China has a crazy bar scene.
Oh yeah. It's, I mean, I wouldn't say it's like, now I've never gone to an American bar because I'm 18. But in China, like technically the legal drinking age is 18, but as long as you have money, they're going to give you the alcohol. So pretty much anyone can go into these bars. Like there was this one bar called Mojo's in Yangshuo, and it was run by the local mafia, right? Which sounds very, intimidating, right? The mafia, but it was just like 6 dudes that wore oversized basketball t-shirts, right? Like, and had some tattoos and chains and just dressed like 90s gangsters, right? But basically they just ran all of the illicit trade in the city, right? All the drugs, all the prostitution, all that stuff just went through this one bar, right? So you would see like, sketchy stuff, right? Where there's a train of women just going into the back, and you're like, oh, whoa, bro, like,
what's going on?
What is going on here, right?
Jeez.
Yeah, and
that's crazy.
It was a little wild, but it was a good time. The mafia guys super chill. They're fun to drink with.
Really?
Yeah, very fun. Yeah.
So you were on a farm as well, right?
Yeah, so that first time when I was 17, after those 3 months I spent in Beijing, I went way to the southwestern corner of China near Myanmar in a province called Yunnan, and I worked on a farm that was run by American missionaries, right? And before I go into this, I want to preface that I was not a missionary. I do not believe in what they believe in. If anyone from the CCP is listening, I did not condone or support anything that was happening on that farm. I was there purely to experience the experience, and all those people got what they deserved. All right,
Yeah,
I'll continue. I'll continue.
Yeah, they're not listening to CCP.
yeah,
Actually,
yeah.
they probably are listening.
Hey man,
They probably are listening.
Like, I don't question, and I don't
Cease
challenge.
your investigations.
Yeah. But yeah, so it was like the way I knew them was like it was like my mom's friend's sister, right? Which, you know, sounds
Once
fake,
removed.
but yeah, exactly. Like her cousin's dog, right? But it was her that ran the farm, and they were it was this couple that were Southern Baptists, right? And they would bring, you know, 12 to 15, you know, young Southern American Baptists.
They were there to bring Jesus, right?
They
That was
were
their-
they were missionaries like that. They were there working on the farm, but like what they were really there to do was, you know, spread the word of Christ, right? And let me tell you, they weren't being too lucky. Because like,
Really?
first of all, you gotta have a good excuse for there being like just all these Americans working on a farm in the middle of nowhere,
Yeah,
right? Like,
yeah.
why are they here?
Just- yeah.
Oh, you know, just come to China, right? Like
Hanging out.
they didn't have a good alibi, right? And also they had like pictures of Jesus all over the place. Like they were one step away from having a cross up on top of the buildings, you know, like they were not super low key.
So
about
why
their
can't
Christianity.
they do that? First
Why
off,
can't they do
Why
that?
can't they spread the word of Jesus?
Well, because, you know, Christianity basically provides a philosophical backing for being a dissident in China, right? So the mainstream Chinese thought process is based in Confucianism, right? Which is very kind of materialistic, and it's all about, you know, obeying authority and in order to basically provide for your family and become wealthy materially and to move up in society, right? And that's
Yeah.
the role that every Chinese person under Confucianism should follow, right? You obey the CCP, you don't question, you don't participate in any opposition politics, you just keep your head down, you do your very specific role. If you're an office worker, you do that very well. If you're a father, you do that very well. But outside of that, you don't do anything, right? So if you're not in the government, you don't have a say about what the government does at all. Right, or that's how it should be under Confucianism. But Christianity, on the other hand, kind of provides a backbone for being a dissident, right? Because it, you know, you're obviously more well versed in Christianity than I am.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you know, you
Yeah.
can see how if someone is a Christian, they might say, "Listen, I know I'm not going to get that promotion. I know I work this shitty job, but I know that I have a spot in heaven, and I'm going to continue to struggle through this struggle and to fight for freedom, and to, you know, continue to fight this fight against the evil devil CCP, right?" And so,
Well, and there's also like allegiance to the Pope too,
right,
which has been a big problem in America too.
right, yeah, all those Irish people, aren't they?
Irish, yep.
What are they
they're
doing?
Irish.
Get them out of here.
They
Yeah.
serve the president. They serve the
They
Pope. You know.
Yeah.
So I bet that's like another.
Yeah, but like in my experience, like out of all the people that I've met in China, the Christians are the ones that are like dissidents. Like
Yeah.
like I remember like when that same trip when I was staying different, the most recent trip when I was in Shanghai, I was staying in a hostel, and you know it was getting pretty late, and there was just a bunch of people sitting in the courtyard chatting, and people were, you know, going off to their rooms, slowly petering off until it was just me and this one other guy, and he basically started hating on the CCP. He saw that I was an American and assumed that I was a Christian, right? And you know, he's talking about Jesus, and pulling up all these WeChat messages of, you know, groups that he was in, you know, long paragraphs about, you know, we need to keep fighting the fight, you know, Jesus is supporting us, right? This is the right thing to do as Christians is to fight for our, you know,
Dude, if the
our liberty and
CCP
freedom.
found out about that,
Right. And it felt like not cool.
Ah,
Like
mutiny.
we were whispering right
Oh
in
my
this courtyard, and
gosh.
it felt like we were breaking the rules. Like talking about this stuff in Shanghai, right? and like yeah, being a Christian allowed him to suffer through not making as much money, not getting a promotion, not fulfilling the traditional.
This wasn't a
Confucian
Southern
role.
Baptist. This is a
This,
Wah.
this is a Chinese person, just a random stranger that I
Really?
met in that hostel in Shanghai, right? And yeah, so to me, it seems like without Christianity, it's very hard to be a dissident in China, right? Because you don't really have any sort of philosophical or moral way of thinking about. So I believe that the CCP's, not necessarily fear, but opposition to Christianity is well based, right? Because if that philosophy spreads throughout China, and you have a significant portion of the population having the philosophical backing to be a dissident, that increases the amount of dissidents and
Yeah.
reduces the stability of the CCP's regime, right?
Yeah,
So-
it would seem it would be good for China, the CCP, to not have Christianity throughout the country, because Confucianism is a much better philosophy to govern the people by. I'm not saying I believe this, but in the CCP's eyes, Confucianism is a much easier way to make sure that people are falling in ranks and doing their job, doing it
following
well.
the role, right?
Yep, following the
Exactly.
rules, do not, talk bad about the CCP. If you're a Christian, then you might believe that the CCP is doing something against God, doing something. You might see that as a way to go against them.
And you see
Reason
yourself
to go
as a
against them.
martyr, right?
Yeah,
Martyrdom
absolutely.
is a huge part of Christianity, right?
Well, yeah,
I mean,
huge.
Jesus was a martyr himself, right?
Yep, and many of the apostles after, actually all of the apostles except for John were martyrs too, the 12.
Yeah. So you can see how, believing in Christianity and reading the stories of the Bible, someone could interpret that and use that to suffer through the life of being a dissident in China, and going home to their shitty apartment every night, reading the Bible allows them to continue fighting against this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So back on topic.
back on topic.
So-
Back to the farm.
Back to the
right?
farm, yeah.
So this farm, I don't know, it had a very weird dynamic, right? Because it was these two groups of people from such wildly different cultures, right? And the Americans didn't speak any Chinese. Like there was one guy, Josh, who was really learning, really trying hard, and he could speak, whole sentences, but not really have a conversation. But pretty much everyone else just stopped after ni hao and xie xie, right? And then on the other hand, all of the Chinese workers that lived on the farm of an ethnic minority, they were called Wa, or they were Wa, and
They died? What do you mean?
No,
They were.
I'll get to that, right? And so the young people spoke Mandarin, 普通话, but the older guys only spoke Wa. They could talking with them was just completely impossible.
Totally different
it was,
dialect.
It was all just hand gestures and
Oh my
smiling
gosh.
at each other and giving them good vibes, right?
That's awesome.
Yeah, but they're all super friendly, all super good natured, and of course, the thing that brought the whole group together was the love of Jesus, right? Everybody there was a Christian.
Except for you.
Except me, right? Yeah, and it was funny. Like they caught on to that pretty quickly.
That you
right?
weren't a Christian?
That I was not, right? And they're all missionaries. That's what they're there to do. So I think every single one of the Americans at some point sat me down and tried to convert me.
Convert you?
Yeah,
Wow.
so why don't you believe in God, right? And
Yeah.
giving me their little spiel, right?
You might go to hell.
Yeah. And these guys were not moderate Christians. Hell, if you do this happens. It was very, very traditional. Yeah, and every night they would have a sermon up in the farmhouse that everybody on the farm would get together for, and it was funny the way that we did the sermon was it would be an old Wa man that would give the sermon in Wa and read from a Wa Bible and sing Wa hymns, and then Meanwhile, there would be one of the younger wall girls would be translating it into Mandarin for me the whole time, right? But of course, she wasn't able to translate it word for word as he was going. It was more like after the end of a paragraph, she would give me one sentence, right? And then from those one sentence little clips that she would give me, I would have to recreate the sermon in English for all of these Southern Baptists, right?
Okay, question. How many Southern Baptists were there?
It was, I'll say like 12 of the young guys, and then near the second half of the week that I spent there, another missionary couple came from Africa and spent like a couple weeks there, and they,
So like 14 people?
15. It fluctuated a little bit. People were going in and out.
But you had to translate. So you had to translate from Wa.
Yeah, well, they would translate from Wa to Mandarin, and then I would have to translate from Mandarin into English, right?
Oh.
And I'm like, I went to church growing up, but like I'm not a Southern Baptist, so I would be like struggling through these like hardcore like just Bible passages where I have to retell like the story of the angel of Gabriel and like Cain and Abel and all this stuff, and like I'm just like stumbling my way through, basically just like judging my performance based on the reactions of the Baptists, right? Because they would be nodding along and smiling and giving me thumbs up and stuff, and then I'd say one thing and you could see all their faces go, right, they all frown,
what's going on?
Look at each other, and I'd be like, rewind a little bit, try it again, and then they'd be, oh, you got it.
Oh my goodness. So you're going completely off the feedback of the crowd.
Exactly.
Oh
I was basically improving a sermon, right? as a non-Christian, right? And
wait, but they would give you what? How good were the things from the person who spoke Mandarin?
I mean,
how would she? Was it just like one bullet point?
Basically, it was one bullet point, but also like my biblical Chinese isn't very good. Like I don't know the word for angel. I don't know the word for Moses. Like half of the things she's saying, I just don't know, and so it takes me a minute to like actually understand what she's saying, and yeah, I just have to try to spit it out for them. But
crazy.
So yeah, it was a struggle.
Biblical telephone.
Biblical telephone. That's exactly what it was. Yeah. And every night for like an hour, I would just be doing that. And I mean, it was good Chinese practice. Practice translating. But the whole time, I just felt like all these hot glares staring at me, and just I was like had no room to screw up at all. Right.
So it was like you gave a sermon every night.
Basically, I just gave the non-Christian gave a sermon to all the Baptists. Like, yeah, it was.
Oh my goodness.
It was an experience, to say the least. Yeah.
Okay, and so also were cow farming as well, or like
that's right. The main purpose of the farm was dairy, right? And so my role that I kind of half chose, half got assigned to was I was one of the poop scoopers, right? So we had about like 150 cows basically on just a giant concrete slab, right? And twice a day, we would have to go in there with wheelbarrows and shovels and just scoop up the half poop, half pee mixture that the cows leave behind. And it was so gross, man. Like
how many hours in the day would you do that?
It would take like 2 hours in the morning, right? Because it was all the poop from the night, and then in probably like an hour and a half in the afternoon. Yeah. Pretty much. I mean, like we would help like, clean up the farmhouse, and like if we were doing something, I would help out with doing that. But
that was like
the rest of my
job.
time was be free time, basically. Oh, we'd also have to feed the cows, which was an ordeal. Like we'd have to. What they would do is they would go up onto the nearby hills and basically cut grass, right, and just cut like literally a ton of grass. Like they would have a massive truck with like 10-foot walls and just fill that up with grass. And then we would have to feed it through a chopper, basically that shredded it up, and then fill wheelbarrows up with that grass and just give it to the cows. Yeah. Yeah.
So you're scooping up shit for like
so much, like
hours in the day.
These cows poop so much, bro. Like
really?
As we're going through, they're still pooping. So like it would be like half a foot like deep of like just liquid fucking green gross cow shit. Like I don't want to gross you guys out, but it was gross, bro. and how we disposed of it is we basically had like swimming pool next to the cow pen that was just full of this cow shit. And so we would just have to wheel our wheelbarrows around the corner and just dump them, right? And it was kind of sketch because like these wheelbarrows full of poop are heavy, you know what I mean? So like I'd have to brace my feet, right, and go up to dump it, and I feel my feet sliding in the mud, right? And like I remember asking them like, has anyone ever like fallen into there? And they're like, yeah, like 3 people. Like it is like 10 feet deep of just like years old cow shit, bro. It was horrible.
10 feet deep.
Yeah, and I would always like I would almost lose the wheelbarrow a couple times because if you lose a wheelbarrow, you have to go in and get it. Like, yeah, so it was. Every time I went to dump the poop, I was like, all right, gotta take my time, gotta focus in, do it nice and slow. Yeah, just because.
That is horrific.
No,
What was
horrible.
the smell just around the area?
I mean, like after a couple days of
You
just get used. It's all on your clothes. It's just
Oh my.
there's no escaping it, and you just don't try at a certain point. Yeah, and it's funny, like the other workers would always like kind of avoid the poop scoopers, like after they were done poop scooping because we smelled like poop. And so like, you know, we'd go up and eat breakfast after doing all that, and you know, we'd have to sit at like a separate table. Right away from everybody else.
Yeah,
just
geez.
like stay away from it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So okay, so you also have a story about killing a cow as well.
On this farm.
Okay, let me preface this story. Animal cruelty is a bad thing.
Bad thing.
Animal
Yeah.
cruelty is
And
a
I
bad thing. Like, I don't.
and I'll preface it by saying I'm a vegetarian now. I don't.
Yeah,
I
you're a
don't,
vegetarian.
Yeah,
I love
don't do
meat,
any
but
of
I
it.
still think like, you know, killing an animal cruelly is a bad deal.
It's
you know
no
what I mean?
good. It's
Not
bad,
good,
right?
right.
But the thing is,
Now,
in China, they do not have that same sentiment. Like animal like suffering or cruelty is just not even in the picture, not even considered at all. In fact, like there's kind of a traditional belief in China that the more an animal suffers when it dies, the better the meat tastes, which is just horrible, right?
Terrible.
So they'll light pigs, like douse them in gasoline and light them on fire to kill them. Like which is
Wait, what? They think it's like a sacrifice or something?
no, just because like coming down from like ancient dynastic China, they believe that the more the animal suffers, the better the meat tastes. I don't know where it
It's
came
absurd.
from. It's absurd. It's crazy, and I don't want to slander the Chinese people, but
That's
that
messed up. That's
happens,
really
right?
messed up.
Like not all pigs, obviously, because it's expensive to do that, you know, and doesn't make sense, and you know it's not efficient. But like you can go onto like Weibo or Taobao and like buy specialty, more expensive suffered meat. You know what I mean? Like meat that has gone through pain in order to get there. It's crazy.
So crazy.
It's crazy. It's nuts.
It's
And
crazy.
like that's like big criticism of China. They need to shape their shit up on animal cruelty. They gotta
absolutely.
stop
That is
shit.
really
Yeah.
messed up.
Yeah.
You would get crucified for doing that in America.
Yeah, it's nuts, right? Like
yeah.
lighting a pig on fire.
Yeah.
It's crazy. All right, but so the way that we killed this cow, right? Every 3 weeks or so, the workers would say, "All right, it's been too long." Old dairy cows that were like separate pen, the old ladies basically that had stopped making milk at that point, and took one of them, and we pulled her out maybe 10-15 feet away from her old pen in front of all of her buddies.
10-15 feet.
10-15 feet, right?
All the cows are just
all
like,
the cows are just like poking their heads out. What's going on, right?
Oh my.
And we tied her up, took a rope, tied her up to a pole, and big gutter there, and Raw men, they're probably like 5 feet, big burly guys, like come out, right? One has like a foot long knife, and the other has a sledgehammer. Kill a cow.
I didn't have any guns or anything.
No guns, because guns are illegal in China. So,
shit.
those are the tools that we had, and that's what they had to use, right? So the
Sledgehammer
guy,
and a machete.
and a machete. That's it, right? And so the guy with the sledgehammer rears up and just cracks her in the back of the head, right? And it's like it sounds like a gunshot because
it's a skull. It's like
it's a skull.
It's like slamming on concrete.
Exactly. And that first hit, she wobbles a little bit, but she's still standing, right? And so he goes in again, right?
Gosh.
She's still wobbling, right? It takes like 2 more hits, and then her eyes kind of roll up into her head, right? And she's like really stumbling, like she's waving at this point, right? And then the other guy with the machete just goes and
Just right.
cuts her throat.
Oh
so
my
she's
gosh,
leaking now.
bleeding
She's
out.
bleeding
Still alive,
out.
right?
Yeah, still very much alive. Like, and then one more hit, and she falls down. And basically they hit her a couple more times when she's on the ground.
So how many hits with the sledgehammer would you say?
I mean, I can't remember like exactly, right? Because it's a little traumatic. You know,
Oh,
like
yeah.
seeing
Oh,
that,
yeah.
right? Because I was like 10 feet away from this, right? I was
Watching
standing
the whole
in the
thing.
little half circle, like, oh, we're gonna kill this cow, and I was like, holy shit, we
That
really killed this
sledgehammer
cow,
and a
bro.
machete.
Yeah, and
Oh my goodness.
and yeah, so she's bleeding out into the gutter, right? So I was like, oh, that's what the gutter's for, right? And so it's just this river of blood, and she's like kicking the blood, so it's just splattering all over us, right? And eventually she stops kicking, and then the guy gives us a thumbs up.
Thumbs up,
Yeah,
the 5-foot wall man.
Exactly. Yeah, we did it.
We did it,
right?
guys.
And now we have to butcher the cow, right? And cows are so heavy. Like, it seems obvious, but like we literally had like everybody there. It was probably 10 people all grabbing onto one of her legs and just moving her so that we could get a tarp under her, right? And then we get the tarp and we drag it up onto this other concrete slab, butchering her, right? So a guy goes, cuts down the middle of her torso, right? Cuts up the legs a little bit, and so we start to peel the skin off, right? And it's like really hot. Like her body was still warm,
Yeah, it
because
was
the blood
alive.
was still pumping, right? And
It was like it was alive like
30 seconds ago.
30
Yeah,
seconds.
exactly. And it took like everybody just to like trying as hard as they can just to
get-
roll her over, right? And eventually we get the skin off, and the guy goes in and he brings out an axe and starts he chops off the
The head?
legs,
Oh, the
right?
leg.
And the head and the hooves,
Gosh.
right? And they took the head, the hooves, and the leather over to a little shed, and they started torching them, right? They just had this massive kerosene torch that they would just
sell
down at the market, yeah, because apparently cow head and hooves is a specialty, right?
Delicacy.
Yeah. And then we get to work to butchering the thing, and the thing is, like, butchering is mostly just cutting the fat off the meat, and there's like thing is like fat, like cow fat, because first of all it's like hot and it's like obviously oily because it's fat, so it's really like hard to grab and like to cut off because your fingers are just slipping all over it, and you're trying to get a good slice, right? And of course all the wall women are just doing it no problem, slicing it
'cause
up
they've
like
probably been doing it
sashimi.
for, like,
Yeah, exactly.
40 years
all
or
looking
so.
at me like, look at this idiot, it's
Yeah.
taking 5 minutes to cut one piece of meat, right?
Man.
Yeah, but eventually
You went butchering for like how long?
it like we were doing it all morning basically. Like we pulled her out when the sun was coming up, and till lunchtime. It was like lunchtime was when all the Americans kind of just checked out and went to get lunch, and just
That was the
didn't-
excuse.
Yeah, we're like,
gone.
we're done, right? But yeah, they kept going like all. Because they used pretty much every part of the cow.
Oh
You know,
yeah.
that's one thing that they did good, right? Is that, they took out all the intestines and they like flipped them inside out and rinsed them off, and they were going to make sausage out of them, right? They took like, I don't know, stomach, and they cut it and they were going to use it for something, and like, all the different little organs got put into their own little bag, right?
They weren't wasting any of the cow.
No. And the thing is, like, the cow is mostly organs. Like, you see a cow, it's like this big round ball in the middle, right? But like that ball is just like stomach and intestines. That's it, right? Like, there's much less meat on it than you would think. That night we had really good like, it was like, I like, obviously
Again, that animal cruelty.
it was horrible.
That was
very
horrible.
bad, and we definitely do not like that.
No, not at all. If we haven't made that clear enough, we
Disapprove.
disapprove of that.
Bad stuff.
Immensely,
right?
yeah.
It tastes.
Dude. Cool. So we got a lot of the interesting things done. What China's all about, the CCP.
Yeah, yeah,
economics, their politics.
yeah, yeah.
So one question that I have is influence of the CCP, is it as widespread? All of China
Mhm.
is some places, because China's a big place.
Mhm.
Are there some places where the their scope isn't big enough to?
Yeah, I mean, like basically that area that I was in was like China's basically because it was super mountainous, super jungly, right? It was basically like imagine Laos or Myanmar, right? And it was right by an area called the Golden Triangle, right, which is in between Thailand, Laos, and Myanmar, which is where most of Southeast Asia's drugs are made, right? A lot of meth, a lot of opium. So that was basically like where all the drugs came in, and where there was a lot of, you know, by Chinese standards, a lot of criminals, right? Like when I would tell people in Beijing that I was going to Yunnan, they was like, "Oh, it's dangerous there." Right. But of course, by American standards, it's super safe. Like no one has a gun. It's like 1 in every 1,000,000 people is a criminal, right? You know, it's more dangerous for me just to walk down the street in San Diego than for me to be in Yunnan. But yeah, by Chinese standards, it was, you know,
Dangerous.
it was a dangerous place, right? Just because it was,
They had a lot of drugs.
yeah,
they had
mountainous, and it's kind of a porous border there. But even there, like the CCP is very present. Like we didn't really wrap up the missionary
Oh,
story
yeah,
to
we need
what
to
what
get back
happened
to
to
that,
these
yeah.
missionaries, right? So about 2 months after I left, the 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 story that I heard was just that the Chinese authorities, the Chinese police, rolled up to this farm, said, "What are you guys doing here?" They didn't have a good excuse, right? "Oh, we're just tourists." Like, no, you're not. All right, there's places of Jesus. And they arrested all the Wa people that worked there, and all the Americans, and deported them back to America. They seized the farm, and
That is unreal.
yeah. But
So okay,
but
so
once again, like the missionaries
It's
were,
not-
were,
it's
were
not
they were
unheard of,
going
yeah.
to like other villages and like giving them water, but also Bibles. Like it's like,
yeah,
come on, man. Like
posters of Jesus all
yeah,
around.
like someone is gonna tell on you. They're not. There's not a no snitching policy in China.
Yeah.
In fact, it's all snitching.
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay. So what happens in like the deportation?
they
You got to get these Americans out of here. So
yeah. So basically, they got put on a police van, and
they just put you in.
exactly, and then you never come back.
So how long after you left?
It was like 2-3 months or so. Like I wasn't sure of the exact date, but it was like if I had been there when all that would have happened, none of talk about how atheist I am all day and how much I love the CCP, like none of it would have mattered. I would have been out of there, and I would never been able to go back to China.
Yeah, they
right?
would have just you
And
never.
I want to go back to China, and they deserve what they got. They shouldn't have been doing it.
Yeah, the CCP. If you're listening, he's innocent.
I agree with what you did. They deserved it. Right.
Oh man, that's crazy. They got deported. And dude, if you were there,
It would have been horrible, man. Yeah. 16 years now, man, all down the drain.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, you know, you gotta live dangerously to get those stories, right? You gotta get a little bit of
gotta
risk
go
in
out
there.
there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So back to what
economics. You wanna
Economics,
talk?
yeah.
Okay.
talk
So,
about-
so I'm not very well versed in China at all. I don't know much about it. And you've been there. You've seen it. So, okay. My first question is, how does China, being communist, have such a good economy? Because I've always heard that that's a big problem with communist countries is that since the government owns all of industry, that there's no stimulation of the economy. There's not a lot of consumerism. There's not a lot of manufacturers and all that. What has China done differently than Russia?
Well, so China under Mao was the situation. Everything is completely centrally planned. There's no private enterprise. Everything comes from the center, right? All economic orders come from Beijing, and they must be followed to a T. Right? all farm production happens in these massive communes. The families don't have any choice. Individuals have no choice in the matter, right? All production in factories is done, through the government. They decide what the quotas are. They decide what to produce, how much to produce, all that, right? But that changed under Deng Xiaoping, right? Who came into power in the 78, and then he started enacting what's called opening up and reform policies, where basically he saw China's position in the world. He saw that it was a poor backwater country with massive amount of labor power, but no capital to really utilize that labor power, right? Like, there's one tractor for every 10 farmers, so they couldn't farm effectively. There was one sewing machine for every 10, garment makers, right? So they weren't able to produce as much as they could possibly produce.
Yeah. So their labor wasn't as...
That's right. That's right. And so what he did is he started opening up China's closed borders. So he said, excuse me, he said that, foreign capitalists can come in here and build their factories here, right? And foreign manufacturers, basically, that's the only scenario, right? You can basically come build your factories here, right? And meantime, he started to slowly develop private enterprise in a couple of coastal cities, right? So like Tianjin, Shanghai, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, all those cities, basically, there was allowed a modicum of private enterprise. That means, you want to start your own noodle shop, you can do it, right? And as long as you don't disobey the CCP and operate that noodle shop within their guidelines, you can that money and it's yours. It's your private enterprise, right?
So okay, so how do they get consumers? Because I thought money.
Right. So under Mao, there was almost no money, right? Like the GDP per capita was like $600 a year, right? Incredibly poor country, right? But with that increase in productivity that came from all the new factories, all this capital coming into the country, they get more jobs, they get more machines, right? With that comes an increase in GDP per capita, and correspondingly, the workers paid more, right? So as more money is flowing into the Chinese economy, the Chinese middle class starts to grow, right? And so now you have, families that, send their kid off to a private school, right? And they want to buy a new Mercedes and they want to go on vacation, right? As they make more money, they become consumers just like anyone else in the world, right? They want to fulfill their needs with all these material things, right?
Also, the opening up of private probably allowed for a greater...
Yeah, exactly.
The middle class is growing.
Totally. And I mean, now China's middle class is the biggest one in the world, right? Just because of the sheer number of people there, right?
Middle class are the consumers.
I've had lots of experiences with the Chinese family I lived with in Beijing. Very standard middle class family. Lived in an apartment in the outskirts of Beijing. Both of the parents worked from 7 a.m. to 10 at night, right? They had one daughter raised by the grandma, basically. It was a very picturesque...
7 a.m, 10 at night?
Long hours.
Goodness.
Because the thing is, raising children in China is really expensive because if you want your child to succeed, you have to put them through all these very expensive classes. You have to send them to a private school, right? You have to send them to ballet class and art class and all these things that allow them to look good, to get into a good college and get into a good job, right? It's this very Confucian way of looking at it, like, this is the way to raise a child, and if you want your child to succeed, you have to do these very, very specific things, right? And all those things cost a lot of money. So in order to be good parents, you would think that, in America, that means spending a lot of time with your kids, raising them well, teaching them good lessons. But in China, being a good parent means providing materially for your kids, right? Giving them the material means to become a good college student, to become a good employee, to become a good Chinese citizen, right?
Really?
Yeah.
Huh, that's interesting. So it's not so much about spending time. Well, I mean, if you're a parent,
they
working
spend
7 to 10, you don't have
Saturday,
much time.
They still have weekends. Saturday and Sunday was all with the kid. They was just going, taking them to art class, taking them to dance class, taking them swimming lessons, taking them to the park. It was all all the time was spent with the kid, right?
Throughout the week, it's
all the grandma. It's all the grandma. School, the grandma's the one that picks her up from school, makes her food, all that. And that's a very typical Chinese family there, with both of the parents working their asses off. They got one kid, and one or two of the grandparents end up raising that kid. And sometimes it's even more like that, where if the family lives in a rural area, both of the parents might have to migrate to an urban city in order to make more money, right? Because working in a factory makes more money than working on a farm, right? So in order to be good parents, they need to leave their children 1,000 miles away in the countryside, being raised by the grandparents, and then come back for holidays and just send, which is, to us seems unfathomable. How could you leave your children like that? But in order for your children to have a good life, they need to get sent to private school, and they need to, check off the checklist of being, to get into a good college. And in order for them to do that, you need to move out of the city. Yeah.
I bet those kids are really taking their school seriously.
Oh, totally. Exactly.
I bet those kids really their parents are gone, and that they're doing what they're doing for the kids.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I feel like that's a major factor about
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just school. I hate Confucianism so much, but the role of a kid until you're 18 is just school, right? You're out playing and playing with your friends and messing around. That's time that you're not spending studying, right? So these kids, they go to school from 7 a.m. to like 6 p.m, right? They eat 2 of their 3 meals at school, and then when they come home, they have to do homework until about midnight, right? Which is insane. Like you're
insane.
Like 15 hours a day, just school, right?
And
that's it.
I spend like 2 hours a day.
Exactly.
I'm in charter school.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But so life
goodness.
for a Chinese student it's just, and it's really to see, like, it's kind of this testing process to see how much strain and pressure you can be put under and still produce results. Because there are some students that go through that process and are able to, ace the SATs, go into Harvard, do extremely well. And those are the people that get put into the top of Chinese society, because Chinese society wants hard workers like that. Kids that are able to just grind away for 10 hours, right? No breaks, no friends, none of that, right? And
what's the alternative? So if you don't do that route, what's the alternative?
You end up working at a noodle shop. Right? You make significantly less money if you don't go to a good college, right? You end up becoming a laborer, right? Or you try to give tourists rides on the back of your moped, right? You make laboring class as opposed to office class.
Okay, so
right?
So we have these people like Bill Gates. We got Bill Gates, not Bill Gates, Steve Jobs. We got Steve Jobs, we got people who didn't go to college that are Mark Zuckerberg, billionaire.
Mm-hmm.
He failed Harvard, right?
Before we go any further, they dropped out of like Harvard and Stanford. It's
that's
not that
true.
they were just
Dumb guys.
dropped out of high school, right? They got in and then they just thought they had a better use for it.
But still, they didn't get a degree. They didn't finish. So in China, is there ever that opportunity? Because there are opportunities in America if you don't go to college where you can still make a
good living, yeah.
Still live pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
In China, if you don't go to school, do you just?
become?
Are there opportunities to make? I'm sure there has to be opportunities.
Like, yeah, there's trades, right? Like China still has plumbers and electricians, right? But pretty much, if you want to be part of the upper middle class or upper class, you pretty much have to. Because China is all about these ranking systems, rating people based on very hard, materialistic, concrete metrics, right? Like, for example, China's version of the ACT is called the Gaokao, the high test, right? So every year there's a date. I think it's like April 20th or something like that. And 420, baby, Hitler's birthday.
that's what we're talking about. Anyways, continuing.
No, but yeah, so all the students, all the seniors in China take the same test on the same day, and that test score goes with them for their whole life. Every job you apply to, every resume, you have to include your Gaokao score at the top, right? Because that's a ranking system, right? And it comes from the dynastic bureaucratic tests, right?
Wait, so you have to put your score that you got on a test.
Yeah, like your SAT score goes at the top of your resume.
Can you take it?
1.
That's it.
That's it. because
ridiculous.
because
You know how many times I've just had a bad test because I've just been out.
exactly. But like in from the Chinese perspective is, you know, it was coming. You know what's going to be on the test. There are plenty of study books, and everyone in China gets the same test, right? It's the same questions. It's the same test for everybody, right? So it's equal, and however you do on that test shows how you compare with all the other students in China, you know? So if you're in the top 1% of scorers on the Gaokao, that means that, you know, based on that metric, you are one of the 1% smartest people in China, right? And so having your kids do well on that test is extremely important, right? So, and you know, in order to do well
That's
on
what
that
you
test,
work towards.
Exactly.
Really, like throughout all your studies.
all your studies is just doing well on the Gaokao, right? And
Do you take it like 18 or something?
yeah, it's basically the end of your senior year, so it's just like the SAT or ACT. Yeah,
That is.
isn't that kind of nuts though?
Yeah, it's. I can't
Because
talk about it
because you think that, you know, well, there's so much more to a person than just them being able to take a test, right?
Yeah.
But
in China,
oh,
no.
that's it. All you are is that number, right? Gaokao. But I mean, it's also, you know, a reflection of China's massive population, right? Like, how could you rate and rank over 1 billion people, you know, across this massive country?
Well, I don't.
You have a
I mean,
massive
I see that you need to do that, but I would think it'd be based off of previous merits.
previous merits, and so how do you rank those merits?
Well, I mean, what
How do
jobs?
you-
What jobs did you do? You know, what
I mean,
what
those
teachers did you have that would recommend you?
those
You
are
know
all
what I mean?
still that's still a part of
It's
it,
still relevant, but
right?
the
But they want it
biggest-
to be concrete and equal. Because not everybody has the same teacher and not everybody has the same opportunities, but everybody takes the same Gaokao, so therefore it's fair, right? It's fair to rank people based on that Gaokao because everybody takes the same test.
Is it more of like an IQ test?
No, it's like
It's straight up just
it's like
mathematics
math
and-
questions and English questions and Chinese grammar and history, and it's very like dry and memorization heavy, right? Like you have to know the date that the communists won in 1949, right? And you have to know the name of the second emperor of the Qing dynasty, right? And all these, you know, all solve calculus and, you know, talk about Emily Dickinson, and it's very broad, right? But very hard.
My
But
goodness. So okay,
yeah.
so
you get a bad score.
you get like your bottom 1%. What happens then? You just get no
You-
jobs. You're screwed for your
you-
life.
All right, so now you apply to college, right? So,
No one
so
accepts you.
no one accepts you. Maybe a really bad college, right? If your parents can still pay for it, you'll get into some college, right? But now your name is attached to that bad college's brand, right? And now when you go to apply to a job, they say, all right, listen, we have this one applicant, did very well on the Gaokao, went to Tsinghua University, the best university in Beijing, and this other guy who did bad on the Gaokao and, you know, went to this really shitty university out in Sichuan, right? They're going to choose the other guy. They're going to choose the guy that went to Tsinghua every single time, no matter how good the interview is, no matter how, you know, eloquent and creative and smart the guy is. They base it on metrics, you know?
Man,
Yeah.
I'm still blown away by the fact besides your
Yeah.
entirely.
I mean,
Like in America, if you do
it's-
bad on the SAT, ACT, you still get into college.
you can just still do something, right? But
Yeah,
like it's,
exactly.
it's,
I mean,
it's the
I
same
should
in
say you
China.
still get into
right?
something.
Yeah. Yeah, like
And you're not
it's the
putting
same
your
in-
ACT score at the top of your applications.
No, you're not. Yeah, but you know, China, it's all about like these ranking steps at every part of your life. You get sorted off and you get sectioned off into what authority deems you to be in, right? Like if they decide that, you know, by being this really good office worker, you kiss your boss's ass really well and you stay at the office until your boss leaves, right? Those are the metrics that you're judged by as an office worker. It's not like how much money you bring in or how well you do at your job. It's more of loyalty to authority, right? You know, kiss your boss's ass really well, then you one of those checks, right? And so all of Chinese life is just passing these little checkpoints and seeing how well you do when you reach that checkpoint, you know?
So, okay, let's go back to the economics. So, what does the upper class look like? I know China has a
They are
Chinese billionaires.
very rich. Like, and the thing is, like, the Chinese upper class is new rich. Now, like in America, we have old rich families, right? Families that have their mountains out in, or not mountains, they have their mansions out in the mountains, right? And they know how to hide their wealth, to conserve it, put it all into the stock market. You know, this is how we create long-term generational wealth that stays in the family, right? We own our production plant, but we don't go into the news. We stay low key, right? But then if you look at, like, you know, the new American rich, like pop stars or people that make their money from the first generation, they want to show their Rolex, they drive their Lamborghini, right? They flash their wealth, right? So pretty much all of the Chinese upper class is like these new pop stars, right? Because I mean, basically the teenagers and the young kids now are the second generation rich, right? And so their parents that made their money in the 90s and the early 2000s were the first generation, right? But they very flashy and kind of tacky, right? Lots of gold, you know, kind of Trump-esque, right? Where
Really?
just marble and gold leaf and, you know, basically just showing, flashing their money as much as they possibly can. They drive the nicest cars. They stay in the nicest hotels. Like,
Really?
it's all about showing your status and showing that you're a part of the upper class, right? Because otherwise, what's the point of being upper class in their mind? It's not just about having money. It's about using that money to show that you're above everybody else. And
It
so,
gives you, I bet it gives you like a big feeling of power.
exactly, because walking down the street decked out in Supreme and Off-White, and, you know, you pull out your key to your Range Rover, automatically everyone around you sees this guy.
America, that's
Right?
for sure.
It's the same thing, but yeah, it's you know,
So, okay,
there's
so
still
how do
rich
those
people.
Chinese billionaires make all their money?
Basically by getting in early on the economic boom of China, right? So if you were one of the few entrepreneurs, let's say let's take Jack Ma for example. He richest person in China. He owns Alibaba, right, which is now this massive internet conglomerate that owns 1 million little subsidiaries and, you know, all these different, you know, little internet companies and apps and games and all that sort of stuff, right? So he started off just code for Alibaba himself and programmers. Actually, he didn't write it. He paid people to write it, right? And he put it on the early Chinese internet. It blew up, right? People like to buy stuff online, and all this money, and like in American capitalism, that money spirals into more money, and as long as you make good investments with that money, it makes more money, right? So that was basically the process for all these Chinese billionaires. Is they start off a little bit ahead of everybody else, and that little bit of money just gives them enough of an edge to basically reap the benefit of this massive the economic boom of China in the last 40 years. Yeah. Yeah, there's more billionaires in China than the U.S.
Really?
Yeah.
So is there a lot of economic disparity too?
Oh, it's super different. Look at the lives of rice farmers. 1 to 2 bedroom houses. They have multiple people sleeping in the same bed. You know, gas for their mopeds. With the nouveau rich of Shanghai or Beijing, right? People basically throw money down the drain. I remember I went to this one club in Shanghai that was called Mint, right? And it was you want to have your own table. Well, Don Perignon, that's another. Spent that, right? Like, I thought it was insane. I went up there and I paid. It was like something like $30 for a drink, right? Of just $30 for a gin and tonic, and I was like, "That's it. I'm and
Like an alcoholic would, right?
nah, you know, you're at the club, get me sober.
Yeah, exactly.
But
Dude, that is crazy. $1,000 for just a table.
Just a table.
Just to sit down.
right. But then all of a sudden, all the models see that you have a table.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Greg, let's go have some champagne, right? It's all, once again, it's all about flashing your wealth, right? So the
economic disparity is
huge. It is huge. I mean, but the thing is, can't really criticize it without criticizing the status quo, and therefore criticizing the CCP, right? So you
So
you don't see any labor movements in China.
Yeah, well,
You don't see
if
any
there were any labor
socialists,
movements.
right? You don't see any, real Marxists advocating for the redistribution of labor or of capital throughout the country. Yeah,
Yeah, so I guess it's not communist in that respect.
it's state capitalism, right? So it's all private enterprise. I mean, there's still a lot of like state-owned companies, right? Like there's like, for example, the telecom industry. There's two telecom companies, and the oil industry. There's China Petroleum and Sinopec, right? So there's a lot of industries that are still state controlled, and the private enterprise has no power, right? But
Over the entire market, like
yeah, in all of China, two companies sell gas, Sinopec and China Petroleum. Yeah, it's all owned by the state, right? And
they own all of oil.
all oil and gas is controlled by the state. But that means they can, kind of toggle it, right? So if they want the economy to increase, boost it a
Up
little
the
bit,
oil.
crank down the price of oil a little bit, and the fire starts going a little bit, right? Or if they want to, get more Chinese people to buy a certain brand of the phone that's made in China, they can just tell China Telecom and get the other one's name. But
Huawei?
no, that's the phone company, right? So if they want more people to buy Huawei phones, they can just tell China Telecom to lower the price of Huawei phones, right? So they get a tight control over those certain aspects of the economy. But then most industries are privately controlled, right? But once again, it's state capitalism, right? So that means that yes, there is private enterprise. Jack Ma can make Alibaba and make as much money as he wants, as long as he stays within the guidelines set by the CCP. That means if the CCP needs Jack Ma to invest in robotics because that's what they think that the future will hold, and that's good for the Chinese people, Jack Ma better obey that, or else all of a sudden he'll find that his billions of dollars just fall out from under him, right? So
why doesn't the CCP say, I'm gonna tax the hell out of these?
Well, because
Why don't they just say, okay, for
which are the CCP? Pretty much every member of upper class of China is a member of the CCP, and in China, money and power are pretty much exchangeable. If you have a lot of power, you can make money. You can turn that into money, and if you have a lot of money, you turn that into power, right? So Jack Ma is an extremely powerful figure in the CCP, and so
he's got to be like a Rockefeller.
I mean, of the internet, basically. Like he owns, Alibaba, and all these internet companies, right? All
Probably got his hand in
Weibo,
like every single market.
and
too.
yeah, exactly. So like the Rockefeller of the internet of China, right?
So okay, so how much corruption do you think is going on? Rich, buying power, making sure that their side is being upheld, that they get to keep their money. How much are they paying these people? Well, because in America it's a very similar process. Like, tax cut or something, you could just
pay a couple lobbyists. You get a couple senators to sign your bill, and boom, there you go, a nice little loophole for you, right? But the problem is that the Chinese government is purposefully opaque, right? Don't want to be transparent, and they don't aim to be transparent. They purposefully have a very, very strong curtain between what they do publicly and what happens behind closed doors. So I really can't answer that question, right? Like honestly and accurately, but like I can definitely say that corruption has been curtailed by Xi Jinping, right? Now a lot of Westerners criticize his anti-corruption campaign for basically just being a way for him to political power, right? So that means that all enemies, oops, we found $1 million in your rolls, go to jail, right? And that certainly did happen. You definitely did see his biggest enemies in Beijing disappear slowly or quiet down, right? But at the same time, there were over 1 million officials that got arrested from what he called big tigers, right? So big officials out in Beijing that control these big companies and are doing a lot of graft and corruption, all the way down to flies is what he called them. Little local officials that are scheming little bits of money, right? So he kind of enacted a sweeping anti-corruption campaign throughout China. So if you're blatantly stealing, you would pretty much kind of get caught. Now, did that mean all corruption was wiped out? No, of course not. CCP officials are still extremely rich, right? But now they know not to flaunt that wealth. You know, drive a Mercedes instead of a Rolls Royce. You get a little bit smaller apartment, and you just be quiet about the amount of money you have. But there is still, you know, many cases of extreme corruption and extreme graft. Basically, there was a local official, I think it was in Anhui province, that he basically gave all the construction contracts to his brother, who owned a construction company, and they ended up finding the equivalent of $4 million in cash molding in an apartment that his brother owned.
Because they didn't have anywhere else to put it?
They couldn't put it in a bank, so they just had this moldy cash just from floor to ceiling. Just an entire apartment filled with cash.
It's
right, and
mind-blowing.
And those stories happen all over China all the time. Right? But you know, the CCP sees it as a threat, and they recognize it for the threat that it is. That is one thing that the Chinese people do criticize and are kind of allowed to criticize, right? Is corrupt officials, and have made a concerted effort to curtail that corruption and stop the public flaunting of public funds.
So are they able to, you know, make it known that the CCP is kind of backwards?
I mean,
or if they do, will they just be captured by the CCP, sent to a gulag or something?
Being a journalist in China is probably one of the hardest games to play.
Oh yeah, how much do I talk about? How much do I
Right,
not?
exactly, because the point of the Fourth Estate is to, you know, reveal.
That must be a scary job, being a journalist in China.
Worst thing ever, right? But the thing is, I think that a lot of that responsibility, you as a journalist publish a story about a corrupt official, you send it to your editor, and then it's up to your editor to decide what policy, and then of course they often do check with an actual CCP official, stamp of approval and stamp of non-approval, right? And the thing is, the CCP doesn't stop all criticism or all, you know, dissent. Basically, they allow these certain lanes of criticism, right? So education is one area where they're kind of rethinking it, and in order to reform the education system, they recognize that it requires some criticism, and that's the way we're going to get a better education system. Because like we were talking about before, the education system sucks for students, it sucks for parents, it's very oppressive. You know, students aren't children, they just are students, and that's it, right? So criticizing that system is allowed, right? So if you as a journalist want to write about, you know, how corrupt this one principal is, right? There is corruption in the school system. Like, for example, I remember I had a Chinese roommate when I went to Massachusetts, and he basically told about at this private, it was basically IB school, right? So kids of Beijing to go to, and they taught all the classes in English. The professors would basically teach a half-assed class, right, where they would half of the answers that would be on the exam, half of the things out of the textbook, and then in order to get the full class, you had to pay for private tutoring from the professor and go to her apartment after school to actually learn the stuff that you would need to pass the exam.
That is crazy. So the teachers were getting paid extra to actually
so
they weren't doing their job at school
on purpose in order to make more as a tutor.
That's crazy.
Isn't like that's
Does that happen in America?
So corrupt, right? Like that is just, you know, so morally reprehensible, like punishing students and only, you know, basically forcing them to be wealthy in order to succeed in this school. Now, everyone in that school was really wealthy, and so they pretty much paid the cost, right?
They're probably paying to go to the school.
Exactly.
They're probably, their parents are probably off slaving away.
Exactly.
Have to pay more money to actually get the education.
So that is one area where journalists and the people are allowed to criticize because the CCP sees that it needs reform, and in order to get that reform, they sort of allow a modicum of criticism, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Blown away by all of this because it's so different than America. Just to go over there and see all this stuff.
Well, once again, I was used to it all.
That's right, because you were
like
in
all these things.
Chinese school for 16 years.
I've seen them I've seen China and seen its culture from the lens of Chinese teachers in America, right? So it was kind of a little bit distorted, right, through that lens, but being in one of those Chinese classrooms, right, where the teacher is Chinese, all the other students are Chinese, all the other parents are Chinese, it's pretty close to being in a Chinese classroom in China. And yeah, so spent so much of my life kind of learning about China from afar, right? Actually coming there, it was just like getting a super concentrated dose of what I.
So how do you think,
Well, I mean, I think that it sort of gives me a good juxtaposition, right? To see that the things that, like, the way we do things here isn't the only way to do things, right? Now, I really don't think that America can take lessons from China and apply them to America.
It's so different.
Like, there's certain ways where we could, right? Like, public transportation is one thing. 2008, they had less than 100 miles of high-speed railway. Now they have over 32,000 miles, which is more than the rest of the world combined. Did that within 15 years, right? And now you can get to pretty much any major city within hours, right? And you get there almost fast. Like, it's super nice. Like, I love the Chinese railway system. But
just on a whole, how China is just so different.
Mm-mm.
In America, yeah, I mean, not talking about how you can apply the things, but just what do you see in America that is good and China's doing wrong, or what China's doing good?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that, like, ultimately these differences come from the history, right? Like, America, we're a really new country, but our roots really are. We're not a white European country. People of color have been here since the beginning, right? But our philosophy comes from the Enlightenment, right? Our ideas about how a government should work and how our society should function come from Locke and Descartes and all the Rousseau and all these Enlightenment thinkers that came about in 18th century Europe, right? Whereas China, their societal philosophy, political philosophy comes from 5,000 years ruling the same place with the same people, right? So what the Chinese people have kind of done is they've honed in a blueprint, right? What it takes to rule China, what it takes to make it a stable country, and that's the blueprint you should follow, right? And that blueprint was completely different from the blueprint in countries, right? Because in Europe, there was constant competition, right? All these monarchs that are constantly competing for land and resources, and then colonies, right? So it was this competition. It was always competition, and the need to vie over your neighbor and get an edge on the monarch next door, right? Whereas in China was never really challenged except for internally, right? I mean, obviously the Mongols invaded, right, and took over, but then they just became another Chinese dynasty, the Yuan dynasty, right? And in the 20th century, the Japanese invaded, right, and almost. But other than that, there was never really any external threat to China, right? It was always internal, right? It was always the other courtly family that was challenging the the current ruling dynasty, right? Or it was another, general within the army that would, secede and then create a rebellion, right? So China's political system is designed to foster internal stability, to foster homogeny within the country, and to create long-term stability, which pretty much support the status quo, don't rock the boat, create small technocratic improvements. You build a new canal, you improve the road system, but you don't shake the boat, you don't change the blueprint, you follow the pattern. And that's basically what every successive Chinese ruler has done, right? A lot of that comes from Confucianism, right? Because Confucianism, when Confucius grew up, it was during the Warring States period in China, where China basically collapsed into 10 to 15 different fighting countries, right, with different warlords constantly vying for power, and it was chaos, it was death, there was famine, right, and the Chinese people suffered during this period, right? And Confucius saw this and basically wanted to create a philosophy to remedy this type of problem. So his main target was what he called societal chaos, right? So it was all about creating a system that pushed away chaos, that was able to navigate this complex web of interactions and social relationships, and to order them, to make them stable, in order to create a more stable country, right? Which chaos in his perspective. And so what he did is he laid out 5 relationships, right? The relationship between ruler and subject, father and son, between husband and wife, older brother and younger brother, and then between friends. Now, the first 4 of those relationships, there's always a power dynamic, right? One party holds the power. The rules over the subject.
Husband is over the wife.
The husband's over the wife. The father's over the son. The older brother's over the younger brother, right? And so, in basically all of those relationships, the person with authority, or the party with authority, has responsibilities that come with that authority. They have the responsibility to provide materially, to allow them to be happy, and the other party to be happy, and basically to provide guidance, right? So I think that the best way to understand, China's government's relationship with its people is to look at the father-son relationship in Confucianism. Right? So under Confucianism, the father is responsible for providing materially. That means giving food, shelter, and education to his son. For basically providing guidance, right? Teaching the son about morals and steering him in the right direction in life, right? And pretty much it, right? That's what the father is responsible for. Now, of course, Confucius 100 other things, but at the core of it, that's what it is: materially and guidance, right? And then in exchange for that, the son has to be obedient, right? In order for this relationship to work, the son has to obey the father and respect the father. Basically recognize his subservience to the father, right? And it's basically that same.
And if you don't have a obedient,
the father can't teach, the father can't provide, right? So the whole relationship breaks down, right? So it's all about, on the one side there's obedience, and on the other side it's providing and giving guidance, right? And that same relationship can kind of be extrapolated to the government-subject relationship. So the government is responsible for providing materially, right? Now, that doesn't mean the government comes in and farms your grains and builds your stuff, right? That's what you have to do yourself. But if the people aren't able to do it themselves, it now falls on the government. So that means if there's a famine, or if, the stock market crashes, the Chinese people look to the government to plug up that hole, right? Whereas in America, we say, hey, sorry, individual fault. You should have, harvested your crop better. Sorry, that's on you, right? The government's not involved in this at all. In China, if a large group of the population isn't able to provide for itself materially, that responsibility falls to the government. And you looking throughout Chinese history, you see the government swooping in places where the American government would not swoop in. Like, for example, there was a basically an online resource trading market that was set up after right before 2008, right? 2000. This was a place for Chinese people to go and buy and sell precious metals and ores, right? So, the price of cobalt is going up. I'm going to buy a bunch of cobalt, and it stays in that warehouse, and then you can sell it when it goes up, right? So it was basically a stock market for all these resources, right? But it was really fraudulent, and the company that was running the market was siphoning off a bunch of money, and after a couple of years, it collapsed, right? And so in America, we would look at that and say, look at all these suckers. They were buying and selling cobalt that they never touched. Like, of course you're going to get screwed, right? Yeah. But now that thousands of people got screwed by this company, they look to the Chinese government because, now all of a sudden all of their savings were gone and they couldn't provide for themselves materially. So the government stepped in, reimbursed all those people, and arrested all the people that ran the trade. Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, the American government would never swoop in.
No.
That would be, that'd just be a good play on the...
Exactly. Good for you. You scammed a bunch of people. Nice. Right? But in exchange for that material... and there's also guidance, right? We forgot about that, right? So it's the responsibility of the Chinese government to guide the country in the right direction. That means, making sure it stays good morally, right? They ban porn. They, ban all these sort of things that the government deems to be immoral, and also provide, economic guidance, right? So it's the government's responsibility to make sure that they're investing in the right things, right? The government is providing a push for renewable energy, AI, robotics, electric cars, all those sort of things is the modern way of the government guiding the country in the right direction, right? And
so tying it back to Confucius,
mm-hmm.
that was another one of the guidance from the ruler to
mm-hmm.
the subject.
Exactly. So
because he's the person in authority, and he has kind of control on which direction the.
Exactly. And so if and then in exchange for that material, the materials and the guidance, the subject has to be obedient and exactly. Like you if it's not the role of the subject to criticize the government, right? Because if the one subject starts to criticize the government, then another subject starts to criticize the government.
They see it as
it's disobedience, but it also hurts the stability of the country, right? So Confucius, his main target was it's all about stability and avoiding chaos
of the wars that were going on.
Exactly,
at the time.
It's all about the warring states, right? So Confucius saw that as the main enemy, right? Is the societal breakdown and chaos, right? So if we start questioning our government and we get a massive widespread movement that's all criticizing the government, now all of a sudden that government is less stable and there's a of regime change, and we all know with regime change comes instability, right? And that is public enemy number one, is instability and chaos. Because sure, the regime change might go smoothly, but if you look throughout Chinese history, most of the times, right, it did not go smoothly.
That is for sure,
right? And so it's not like, the Confucius still recognizes the need for government to improve.
Yeah,
right.
Definitely.
And reform and legislate and change its bad parts. But that's not the role of citizens. The citizens are not involved in that reform process. It's for the people within the government, within the CCP, to do that themselves, right? So they need to constantly be rigorous about improving themselves so that the people don't have the grounds to criticize.
It almost seems like in order to have stability throughout the country, China, they're not you need to press free speech, press the disobedience. But in America, we value criticism over the government over stability.
Mm-hmm. Criticism of all authority, right? Like
exactly.
All authority should be poked at, right? Everybody should constantly be kind of an activist and pushing against what they feel is wrong in our country, right? Because we believe that's the only way we can change for the better, right? Like if you look at a lot of the big changes in American history, it comes from the ground up.
Sure, and I think it really stems from a lack of trust in, right, in America at least.
Yeah.
In China, I think it almost seems like the reason why it's stable is because there's a certain amount of trust in the ruler, trust in the father, trust in your friend.
Yeah.
Right, and so it seems like it's very connected in trust.
Yeah,
In America, it's the complete opposite.
Yeah.
We just don't trust our government. You know, we have.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know if trust is the right word, but I think it is.
Believe and respect the authority of, right?
Respect the authority of us. Yeah.
Right. So and that really.
And I mean, looking at America, sorry to cut you off,
No,
but
go ahead.
looking at America, seems like we're pretty unstable at this point.
Yeah.
We don't have a lot of stability.
No.
We're kind of being very expedient in our way of spending our money, especially in the military. Very expedient in our way of, you know, ExxonMobil company.
Yeah.
It's not very sustainable.
It's all about quick money,
Quick
my
money,
generation,
fast satisfaction.
Right. It's, you know, today,
Yep.
a week, a year maybe, but not 100 years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, China. I don't know. I feel like there's a certain long-term play that China's doing by having this. Well, and also the Confucian doctrine. Well, not doctrine, philosophy.
It's a doctrine too.
Doctrine. Yeah. It seems like it really works. It almost led to what very authoritarian, you know, top-down process.
Pyramid. Yeah.
Pyramid,
Yeah.
You know, in America, it's, you know, anyone has their shot at the presidency, so they say.
Right.
I don't know. It's just
And
it seems like they're a lot more stable,
yeah,
right?
And that's because
People don't criticize the government. Because if you criticize the government, ability.
right, exactly. And like you were talking about how Chinese people respect and obey authority, that comes from a very young age, right? Because as soon as they get put into school, they get beat and crushed into a mold of an obedient child, right? And if they don't, they get punished, right? They get ostracized by their peers. The teachers send them outside. They send them to the shittier school, right? Their parents whip them into shape, right? From a young age, it's all about crafting these obedient, you know, people that respect authority, right? And obey
that as
authority.
brainwashing,
right? We see it as brainwashing, but now all of a sudden you have a whole country that is able to cooperate, not question, and basically be a little gear in the machine and just be happy for being a gear in the machine without saying I don't want to be a gear, right? Like right?
You
Here in
can't do
America,
that. You can't say that I don't want to be a piece of this puzzle, you know? If you decide I'm going to be, you know, right? What happens? You just get kicked out.
Yeah, exactly. You get pushed out of society.
Get pushed out of society forcefully.
Exactly. And that happens from a very young age. And if you aren't able to deal with that, you won't be able to be a part of Chinese society. You won't get a job. You won't find a wife. You won't, you know, all these things, right? That you know, Chinese people put up as an example of having a good life. You won't have access.
Yeah, so there's real consequences.
Against the norm, exactly. It's all about fitting in, following the status quo, not causing a ruckus. Don't rock the boat, right? And that's how you succeed, right? You just you work really hard in this really specific narrow area that you've been assigned or, you know, chosen, right? So if you're an engineer, your only job is to be a really good engineer. That's it. If you're a husband too, then you got a really good husband, but outside of that, you have no responsibilities, and it's not your job to do anything outside of your specific roles, right?
It's not your role to criticize anything else anyone else is doing.
Definitely not. Definitely. Yeah, and I mean, I experienced that myself, right? Like going through Chinese preschool and being taught by Chinese teachers, right? I experienced that, you know, kind of that brainwashing a little bit, right? Like I, you know, am cautious to criticize the CCP, right? Because kind of that's how I was raised, right? Now I've been sitting here criticizing them for a bit, right?
Not now.
Yeah. But like, yeah, from a young age, you know, you learn from your teacher's reactions. There are questions you don't ask, right? Like, you know, what happened in Tiananmen Square in 1988? I don't know, and I won't say it, right? Like I remember, like, as a kid, like, you ask your teacher certain questions, and you see in their eyes, right? They give you a bullshit answer, but they're telling you, you don't ask. Grew up in China, right? And they were taught you don't criticize, right? And by asking that question, you are inherently criticizing, right?
Yeah, it's like they're lying to themselves.
Right. Yeah. But in order,
Man, there's a lot of things to think about, but I think we should.
yeah, definitely.
This has been a great one.
This has been a
Eric.
good one. Yeah.
Title is gonna be China. China. That's it.
Yeah.
All right. This has been the Outlet Podcast,
Yeah.
the Gabe and Eric show, if you will.
Yeah.
Thank you all for listening.